2 test will come in 2 parts. One part will have 11 questions. The second part will have 13 questions. Depending on the year that you're going to be watching this, you will have the days different. In the year 2014, that would be Monday and Tuesday. Some other year it will be different, but I don't want to have to make this recording over and over again. So you just have to adjust. All right, so on the test, in the part that is first, there are these 4 different things that you're going to end up doing: solving equations and fractional ones, factoring or using quadratic formula, solving a variable equation, and a couple story problems. There's 4 problems of this type, 3 of this type, 2 of that type, and 2 of that type. On page 129 in the review assignment, these problems are the ones that relate to these questions. Then if we go to the part 2 section, which would be the second day, you have solve inequalities using a sign chart. There's 2 of those. Solving just regular inequalities and then having to either graph the solution or write it as an interval. There's 3 of those. Solve other types of equations. And then operations with complex numbers. And again, these problems deal with what's going to be on the test. So let's look at all of the different examples that you would see. First here we're solving a fractional equation. In order to solve a fractional equation, the first thing you want to do is get rid of the fraction. To get rid of the fraction, you have to find common denominator for everything, and so you have to factor each denominator. In this denominator, you can divide a 2 out, and you would get x plus 3. In this one, you can factor out a 5, and you will get x plus 3. And so the least common denominator is going to be all the different factors that you have. You have a 2, you have a 5, you have a 3. 2 times 5 times 3 is 30. And you also have x plus 3. So the least common denominator is 30 times x plus 3. Now then, before you try to solve and multiply and everything, just remember that you should recall what x cannot be. And in this case, x cannot be a negative 3 because that would make this 0, and you can't have 0 in your denominator. So now that we've found the least common denominator, we have to multiply each part of the equation by the least common denominator. When you multiply this by this, and that's like over 1, 2 goes into 30 15 times, and the x plus 3's divide out as well. So then you have 15 times 9, which is 135. Second one, when you divide, there's a subtraction sign here, so it's minus. And now, when we do this, 5 goes into 30 6 times. And then the x plus 3's also divide out. So now we have 6 times 7, which is 42. Equals. And then lastly, 3 goes into 30 10 times. And so now we have 2 times 10, which is 20, times x plus 3, because we didn't divide that out of this one. So 20 times x plus 3 is 20x plus 60. And so now that we have this, we would solve it by subtracting 60 from both sides. So we can isolate the variable. 20x equals 33. And finally, then you would divide by 20. And x equals 33 over 20. Now, when you're doing these questions on the test, this part here is worth a point. It's the work that's going to be worth more. Had this answer come up to be x equals a negative 3, then because of our least common denominator that says that x can't be a negative 3, well, then that wouldn't be a solution to it. But this case it is because 33/20 is not a -3. All right, another question like that. Same thing, got to factor it. Can't factor the first one, it's already in factored form. Second one, you can divide a 2 out to get 2x plus 3. And so then our least common denominator is going to be 2 times 2x plus 3. Because that's this denominator. It's that. Already have that one, and this one has no denominator. And so then if this least common denominator is 2 times 2x plus 3, x cannot be a -3 halves. And that you just have to keep in mind for when you get done with the problem. So then multiplying this out, first this one times this whole thing, 2x plus 3 divides out of both, so then we have 2 times 2x, which is 4x. Second one is 2 times 2x plus 3, so those things both divide out, and we just have plus 6, not 4, but 6. And then finally, when we do the last one, nothing will divide out because there is no denominator. Well, it's actually 1 then. So then 5 times 2 is 10, and 10 times 2x plus 3 is 20x plus 30. And solving this, subtract 4x, 30, and get a -24 equals 16x. Then dividing, you divide by 16 with both, and then x equals a -24 over 16, which simplifies to a -3 halves. And that should ring a bell because it was our part of our least common denominator, and it's a restriction on this solution. So -3 halves cannot be used because that turns the denominator into 0. So that is the only solution we got, and we can't use it. So therefore, this is no solution. One final one like this is 3x over x minus 2, 1 over x plus 2, and -4 over x squared minus 4. That one you can't factor, nor can you factor that one, but this one is x minus 2, x plus 2. And so then the least common denominator is x minus 2, x plus 2. And so then we know that x cannot be 2 or -2. And so then we go through the process of multiplying. First one, x minus 2's divide out. So we have x plus 2 times 3x, and that is 3x squared plus 2 plus 6x. And then when we multiply the second one, the x plus 2's divide out, and we have x minus 2 times 1. So that would be plus x minus 2. And finally, when you take this x minus 2x plus 2, -4 over that, multiply it out, both things divide out, and you're left with a -4. Then you have to try to solve this, and because you have an x squared term and an x term, or a quadratic and a linear term, got to get everything to one side, and the other side has to become 0. So we have 3x squared plus 7x plus 4 now you have to try to factor it or use the quadratic formula. This one, though, is nicely factorable because the factors of 3 are 1 and 3, and the factors of 2 are 1 and 2. And if you take 2 times 3, you get 6, and 1 times 1 is 1, and 6 plus 1 is 7. So we have x and 3x. And then we would have plus 2 here, and plus 1 here. Just so you understand that. This 1 is with the x. This 3 is here. And then this 1 is here. That 2 is there. When you multiply this all out, you would get 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. And so then, if x plus 2 is a factor, x would equal a negative 2. If 3x plus 1 is a factor, then x would equal a negative 1/3. And then, because we had a restriction here of x can't be 2, that solution, or a negative 2, I should say, both of those two things. This one is a negative 2, which is part of the restriction, so that one we can't use. And the only solution then is x equals a negative 1/3. All right, then getting a quadratic equation and solving it by factoring. Factors for x squared plus 8x minus 33 would be x and x, because the only factors are 1 and 1. 33 would be 11 and 3. And this would be plus, and that would be minus, because now when you multiply, you would put a plus 11 minus 3, because that's 11x, that's a negative 3x, which totals 8x. So then, in this case, x is a negative 11, and in that case, x is 3. There was no fraction in here, so we don't have to worry about any of the solutions not working. If it was not factorable, then you would have to turn to the formula and do it that way. Next part of your first part of the test would be solving a variable equation like this. We're going to solve for r. We have to get rid of everything on the side with r, so we're going to subtract p. And this is supposed to be p1, and that's p2, and that's just straight up p. So then we have p1 minus p2 equals prt. And so then, since we're solving for r, we want to divide by pt. And they're not compatible to do any dividing, so we just have to write it as that. Second one, we're solving for q. Q is here. We have fractions, so the first thing you want to do probably is find a least common denominator, which is going to be fpq. You multiply, you're going to get pq equals fq plus fp. Now then, if we're solving for q, we got to get rid of the one side. So you subtract fq, get pq minus fq equals fp. We are still trying to solve for q, so we got to factor q out and get p minus f plus fp. And then finally, get rid of the p minus f and divide by it. over P minus F. And there you've solved it. So now we have two people with two radios with a maximum range of 2 miles. So we've got to make a table. And one leaves a certain point, travels north at 4 miles per hour. The other one goes south at 6 miles per hour. The second person left 15 minutes later. So if you have person 1 and person 2, person 1's rate and time and distance, because that's what you're dealing with here, their rate is 4. Time is x, so that makes that 4x. Then the rate for the other one was 6. But they leave at 12:15. So then they travel the same amount of time, less 1/4 of an hour. So that's 6x minus 3/2. Now the total range of the walkie-talkies is 2. So then 4x plus 6x minus 3/2 equals 2. So then solving this, 10x, add 3/2, which is 1.5, so 3.5, divide by 10. We should have an x here, huh? All right, then we divide by 10, and x will equal 0.35. So in 0.35 hours. At 0.35 hours, if you multiply that by 60, is 21 minutes. Okay, that's all one story problem. Second one. Talking about wages of somebody and their assistant. And for the consultant, they work at 60 miles per hour. The assistant is $60 per hour, and the assistant is $20 per hour. You don't know how much either one of them work exactly, but you know that the assistant worked 5 hours less, so that would make the consultant x, and that would be x minus 5. And then when you multiply, you get 60x, and you get 20x minus 100. Now the total bill, so then this should be wage per hour, hours worked, total. And you know the total is 580. So then you have 60x plus 20x minus 100 equals 580. And then you add and get 80x, add 100 equals 680. Divide by 80. question wanted to know an 8.5 represents the number of hours for the consultant. A little tongue-tied there. And so that would be 8.5 hours for consultant. And the apprentice worked 5 hours less, so 3.5. Okay, then factoring this or finding out the solution, it's greater than or equal to 0, so you first have to factor x. That would give an x squared, which gives you x plus 2. Go to negative 4, x plus 2. Greater than or equal to 0. Then we distribute, or not distribute, factor again. And you can take an x plus 2 out. X squared minus 4. That can be factored even a second time. That's x plus 2, x minus 2, x plus 2. And so then, in this case, x is equal to a negative 2. Same here. And x is a positive 2. Then you have to make yourself a little interval chart on a number line. Here's negative 2. There's positive 2. Factors are x plus 2, x plus 2, x minus 2. And since these occur in pairs, there's a pair of them. If that was a positive and that's a positive, you're going to stay positive. Well, if this is negative, this has to be negative, and the negative times negative is positive as well. So you don't have to really even list those here in your chart because those are going to cancel each other out, basically, as far as making the chart. So you don't have to worry about is x minus 2. If you choose a value, let's say a negative 3, substitute it in, you're still going to have a negative number, and the result when you multiply, which is just multiplying just one thing, it's going to still be negative for a result. And if you go to the second interval, pick a value in between negative 2 and 2, which is 0. Again, you don't need to use those two because that's not going to do anything for it. But 0 minus 2 is negative. And so then the result is negative. And then finally, you pick a number over on the other side, which let's use 3. And 3 minus 2 is 1, so it's positive, which is going to give you plus there as well. Now the question wants to know what is greater than or equal to 0. Well, this interval is greater than 0. The interval, though, would start at 2. And you also have to put 1 at negative 2. Because negative 2 turns this all into 0, and we have greater than or equal to 0. And when the negative 2 is in, you're still equal to 0. So then your solution would become 2 to infinity, and the union with just straight up negative 2. And brackets around that, because that's the only number it includes. Alright, then solving these inequalities, equations. First, you can multiply that times that and that times that to get 6x minus 4 less than or equal to 4x plus 4. side, subtract 4x, add 4, and you will get, let's subtract 2x is less than or equal to 8. And you divide by 2. What did I do wrong? Oh, that was a silly mistake. Let's go back. Here, when you do this multiplying, and then you multiply those two, your answers have to go on the side of the numerator. So this should have been 6x minus 4, and this should have been 4x plus 4. So then we would get 2x here, 8 there, divide by 2, get x, there's the 4. Guess I didn't mess it up before. Just looked funny. Alright, so then you would have on your number line, if you wanted to write it that way, at 4, close circle, off to the right. As an interval, 4 to infinity. Alright, then this other one. You can multiply that times that times that. X plus 1 is greater than 4x minus 6. Move things around. Subtract x, add 6. Oh, that's 3x. Okay. Then you would divide by 3. X is less than 7/3, so number line, 7/3, open circle, that way. If you're going to do the interval thing, you say negative infinity, 7/3. And then you would be done. Now we have this one. In 2014, this is the one we ended on, and we didn't finish it all. So today we will do it all. Square both sides. When you square this thing, you will get 2x plus 15 minus 4 times the square root of 2x plus 15 plus 4. And when you square the other side, you will get 6x plus 1. Now we have to isolate the square root again, so we got to subtract 2x, subtract 15, subtract 4. So now you have a negative 4 times square root of 2x plus 15 You can one of two ways at this point. You can get rid of the negative 4 next, or you can square both sides. And you don't have to deal with fractions so much. So we'll do that. So we're going to get rid of the square root. So negative 4 squared is 16. And then 2x plus 15. And then squaring 4x minus 8 would be 16x squared. Minus 144x plus 324. Distributing the 16 would get you 32x plus 240. A little sloppy. Okay. So then you're going to move it all to one side by subtracting it. Same with the 240. So then you have 16x squared minus 174x plus 84. And so then, because they're all even, you can divide something out of all of those. Let's try, I do believe only 2 will. So that would make that, if you're doing it, dividing the whole thing by 2, divide that side by 2 also, and it's still going to be 0. 0 equals 8x squared minus 7x plus 42. Then, turn to the formula. 87 plus and minus the square root of a negative 87 squared plus 8 times negative 4 times 8 times 42 all over 2 times 8. So from here then, 87 squared, 75, 69, 4 times 8 times 42. Then sometimes the simple math escapes me. This should be 176, not 174. Now when you divide that by 2, that becomes, oh, going to adjust all of this. 8 squared 77 44. That turns into 6,400. The square root of that is 80. So then you have 88 plus 80 all over 16. 88 plus 80 is 168 over 16, which is the same as 10 and a half. 88 minus 80 would be 8 over 16, which is a positive half. And so you have 10 and a half and a positive half. And if you go back up to the original, 10 and a half in there would work, and it would also in there. Positive half will also work in both of them, so they're both going to be solutions. And the reason they work is because when you substitute it in, the thing that is underneath the square root is going to be a number that's greater than or equal to 0 with both of those two things. And so they both work. And there you have that question. It took a little long because I messed up, but I hope you get the general idea. Finally, on your test, you will just have to do some things with complex numbers, like add them. Add like terms. 4, negative 5i plus 3i is a negative 2i. And if you subtract them, 2 minus 2, which would be 0. Negative 5i minus 3i is a negative 8i. And you can write it as just a negative 8i if you want. When you divide, you have to multiply by the conjugate, which is 2 minus 3i, on both the numerator and denominator. And the reason it's 2 minus 3i is because you've got to get rid of the i's in the denominator. In order to do that, you multiply by the conjugate, which then 2 times 2 is 4, negative 6i, positive 6i, which go away because that's 0, and then that becomes a negative 9i squared, which is still a positive 9. Then in your numerator, that is 4, that is a negative 6i, that's a negative 10i, and that is a positive 15i squared. And again, we know that I squared is negative 1, so that becomes a negative 15. 4 minus 15 is a negative 11 minus 16i all over 13. Now you can also write it as a negative 11 13ths minus 16 13ths I. Either way is fine with me. And so that is what will be on your Chapter 2 test.